The eighth and final current petition is PE1458 by Peter Cherbi on the register of interest for members of Scotland's judiciary. Members have note by the clerk and the submissions. I'm sure, like other members, that I've looked through this in a great deal of detail. This is actually a very interesting petition. The members will probably be aware that the current position which the Lord President, I think, outlined is if a sheriff or judge faces a conflict in a case, for example, he or she plays golf with the accused, and as with the New Zealand case, that the judge allegedly owed some money to one of the lead defence lawyers, which has triggered one issue off. They have the ability to recuse, which basically means that they can disqualify themselves for that particular case. The issue that the Lord President and the Scottish Government have said is that they have no plans to introduce any changes. The two positions are the Scottish Government could change the law around this, in other words, create a standards register that we have to comply with, and MPs have to comply with, and ministers have to comply with, or the Lord President can introduce administrative changes to the rules. So either is a possibility if the Government or the Lord President were so minded. Neither are so minded. The petitioner, I think, put quite an interesting argument forward to say that, well, there's no real evidence here. I mean, how many judges are declaring an interest in recusing during the course of a case, or are there any judges holding a case in which they've got an interest and are not declaring an interest? So that, I think, is the way it was divided out. But also what the petitioners argued is that lots of other public groups have to have a registered interest. Why are judges any different? So this is it's quite a difficult sort of dilemma, because the people who are trying to change are quite clear there's not going to be any change. But it goes back to my earlier point that we've always had a good tradition in this committee of going the extra mile for every single petitioner. Is there any more information that we need from particularly the Lord President? For example, how many judges have recused themselves and how effective is the system? We don't actually know that piece of information. There is a wider issue. Some of the tabloids have reported that there's been judges with convictions, for example, and the issue which may come up in future petitions are issues around, if, for example, they've got a Masonic interest, are they declaring it? And the final point before I throw it on to members is there's probably three areas where judges already have quite solid background. There's the judicial oath, there's the statement of principles, and then there's the judiciary legislation 2008. So there is some areas which judges already have to comply with, which would set against the registration of interest. So hopefully that's a reasonable summary before I throw it over to members. Jackson Carlo?
Thank you, Convener. When you said the judge could play golf, I'm sure you wouldn't want to discriminate. He could be playing darts, five-a-side football, or going out clubbing with the accused as well. I think if we're being entirely reasonable in those circumstances. I have to say, when I first saw this petition, I wasn't terribly impressed with it, but actually I'm more impressed as a consequence of the responses that we've received. And the student anarchist in me slightly smells the whiff of vested interests closing doors and backs being slapped in an effort to shut the whole matter down. In fact, the protest was so great that, as Lady Macbeth methinks the Lord President doth protest too much. I would very much like us to commission an evidence session and invite the Lord President, if that's within our competence, and other vested interests who believe we should close this down, to justify their position to the committee. And I think that since it's quite clear no other area is examining this at the present time, I think that on behalf of the petitioner, this is an issue that maybe should be aired in public rather than just in writing.
Well, I think that's a very interesting development. And just to answer the technical point, yes, it's perfectly competent for us to invite Lord Gill. Can I ask him?
When I read this, I couldn't agree more with Jackson. When I looked at the Lord President's letter and it said unintended consequences, the introduction of such a register could also have unintended consequences. Consideration requires to be given to judges' privacy and freedom from harassment by aggressive media or hostile individuals. Now, if you want to take out judges and put in politicians there, then fine. Why are they any different? And I agree. We should have the representation of the Lord President or Lord Advocate or all of them, as Jackson Carlo suggests. Have them here.
Thank you, Mr. Brodie. Comments from other colleagues? John Wilson.
Convener, I think Jackson Carlos came out with a very good suggestion that we actually have Lord Gill along to committee to explain the reasons why he has written in response in the way that he has. And I think it's, in fairness to the petitioner did respond in a strong manner, and I think the response from the petitioner would have encouraged me to write again to the Scottish Government and to Lord President to seek clarification as to how confident they are that the current system is above reproach and that judges and others do recuse themselves when they know someone who is appearing in front of them either as a solicitor, advocate, QC, or as the person charged with an offence. So it would be, I think, extremely useful not only for the petitioner, but I think for this committee and the Parliament to have Lord Gill along to, unless as Jackson received the response from Lord Gill already in terms of the issue. But I think it would be good for the Parliament and good for this committee if we did invite Lord Gill and others along to give account as to why they think there is no need for any action at the present moment.
Ms MacDonald.
When I came in to the committee this morning, I hadn't expected the debate to go down this route. However, now that Jackson Carlo has suggested that Lord Gill should appear in front of the committee, I think it's an excellent suggestion. And it would also be helpful if we could get further information on the legislation that's been proposed in New Zealand to further look at that.
Just that triggers my point, Mr MacDonald, that I think there was 10 very useful points developed in New Zealand to weigh up whether it was necessary to introduce any further controls, inverted commas. So I would certainly suggest, if members haven't already looked at these 10 points, they are familiar with these before we take Lord Gill in at the next appropriate meeting. Are there colleagues that haven't spoken, perhaps? So the sense of the meeting then is that
I know that the petitioner called for a register of pecuniary interests of Judges' Bill. I'm not too sure it should be, the investigation should be limited just to that, and then we look at the total register of interests that judges may have. I don't know whether that's competent or not, but
yes, well, I think that's a perfectly fair point that we can raise with Lord Gill when he appears. But I would suggest that members look very closely at what's happened in New Zealand. And there's more to it than just New Zealand, because the petitioner himself made that point, but I do think we need to focus on that. Are members agreeable then that we'll continue this petition and we'll invite the Lord President, and he may wish to take some colleagues with him, and the clerk will arrange this for an appropriate meeting in the future? Is that agreeable? Thank you for that.